This is a YSG commander review. YSG is still one of the best commanders in the game as a free-to-play option, between the fact that you can execute him early and easily, and the fact that his skill damage boost is still one of the absolute best in the game. He's pretty much just the gold standard for great value commanders. So in today's video, we're going to be going over his skills, the talent trees you should use if you decide to use him as a primary, what kind of formations you're going to use, spoiler alert, it's Wedge, and basically any other pairings that you can use both in the early game and in the late game. Without further ado, let's get started. First, let's go over YSG's skills. YSG's first skill is originally just a 5-target fan that hits in front of him and does a little bit less damage for each additional target. But once you expertise it, it actually becomes a circle-shaped area. This is great for things like barbarian chaining. It is great for picking up a ton of extra damage. And no matter where an opponent hits you, you're going to be able to hit them back as long as there are 5 or fewer people. YSG's second skill gives a 10% chance to gain 100 rage and increase the attack of archers for the next 3 seconds. This works when you're being swarmed because there's no cap on it. On top of the fact that it gives you a bunch of attack, which is great because attack increases your normal attacks, as well as your counter attacks, as well as your skill damage. So it is YSG's natural way to resist swarm outside of his AoE. On top of the fact that the 100 extra rage means more skill uses. YSG's third skill is a garrison skill that gives 10% increased attack to the troops in the watchtower for your own city. This is really not a great skill, and if it weren't for the fact that YSG's expertise gives you an AoE, you could probably run YSG 5515 and be just fine. But since the expertise makes it a circle, you kind of need this skill. YSG's fourth skill is by far his best. It is just a straight 50% increased skill damage. This takes any modest damage dealer or any strong damage dealer, any AoE, or any commander that just primarily does their damage by skill damage, which is most commanders, and dials it up to an insane amount. Of course, as we mentioned, YSG's expertise just turns his fan into a circle and boosts the damage factor. But it's worth mentioning that the 1700 damage factor is then boosted by 50%. This is why YSG has been as strong as he is for so long, because it puts out so much damage, and whenever a new commander comes out, you can take whatever number of damage factor they've increased to for archers, and then you add 50% to that. And that is an insane amount of boost, and basically keeps them relevant in perpetuity. And even the newest Liang hasn't really unseated YSG. Next, let's go over talents. YSG's talents are really not super relevant because most of the time you're going to want him as a secondary. Since he is so squishy and he has the garrison tree, especially if you use him in the field, you're going to want to have him as secondary. But in the early game, if you want to use him as a primary, this is the standard tree I use. I love having Feral Nature, it's super useful. The additional skill damage is nice for both himself and whoever his secondary is. The clarity is nice to help boost your secondary commander's damage. And by the time that 6 seconds is up, you're probably back around to your cast if you're using the skill tree. Venomous Sting is super nice because, again, active skill damage, and that is basically going to be your focus of talents. As much attack, as much rage, and as much skill damage as you can stack. And you're going to follow that through on pretty much all your trees. If you're using him in garrisons, you can give up some of the skill tree or these little side talents to further invest up to Impregnable and up through Impenetrable Fortifications and Empty Fortress Stratagem, as those are the must-haves for all garrison commanders. Now that we have covered the talents, I'm going to briefly go over formations. Spoiler alert, you're going to want to use Wedge. The whole point of Wedge formation is dealing more skill damage, and YSG is the skill damage commander, so Wedge is what you're going to want to use with him, even if he's secondary. For equipment, depending on what your use case is, you're going to want to get at least 4 out of 6 on the archer set. However, if you want to go further, you can, up to the 6 out of 6. But I prefer to stay at 4 out of 6 and then eventually be working on the Siege of Conquest items. because the raw stats feel more useful to me. But the 6% health you can get from the full set bonus is super useful as well. So if you want to go for the full 6 set piece bonus, that's great. But at a minimum, you want that 4 piece, again, for more skill damage. Because it will pay dividends for you in the long run, and it makes YSG's high damage and high skill damage for allies even higher. And that's really what you're going to want to aim for when you're using YSG. Now, we're going to finish up by talking about pairings. When it comes to YSG, your pairing is going to come down to your intended use case. If you want to use him in the field, you have several options. Boudica Prime is a great option. She is super useful, she's tanky, she keeps him alive, and then also puts out a good amount of damage on her own, which can then be boosted by YSG. On top of the fact that she increases the skill damage taken by the target she hits, so then you're doing more skill damage, they're taking more skill damage, and it creates an endless feedback loop of just very high skill damage dealt. Alternatively, if you have Nebu already built up and you want to go for something that's 5-5-5-1, Nebu's a great option. You could also go full expertise on him if you want. They make a great pair because the AoE can make great use out of that 50% skill damage bonus. But overall, Boudica is probably the better pair overall. If you want to go for garrisons, the standard pairing for YSG is having Dido as a primary, as you can run full archers. You can have her skill damage factor of 2000 further augmented, and then she debuffs the enemy skill damage, which is a great way to be tanky. On top of the fact that when you get swarmed, you take less normal attack damage, and you will also have increased attack and rage because you're being swarmed, and YSG's second skill comes into effect then. So overall, that is a great pairing, especially if you don't have Liang or Heraclius. YSG pairs very well with Dido. Some alternative options in the early game, a very popular one is Alexander YSG. My personal favorite in the earlier stages of the game was Richard YSG. It is the standard of barbarian farming, and it is the standard of great options, and is generally pretty good in the early game because you're tanky, but you deal a good amount of damage with your secondary commander, which then helps make up for the fact that you're not dealing a lot of damage otherwise. And that works pretty much up until Season of Conquest, and then it falls off very quickly, though, which is worth mentioning. So as a free-to-play, you might want to hold on to your heads for Richard and just hold on to YSG until you get Boudica Prime and Nebu coming out. If you like doing chaining and you want something that's a little faster, if you happen to have Artemisia around, I use Artemisia YSG a lot for chaining Kahars between the AoEs they both have. It's super useful in the damage boost that Artemisia gives on her 4th skill. And if not, you can always use, just like as we said with Richard, is a great option too. You can use Scipio Prime if you want to with YSG, but it hurts a little bit more because you just don't have as much stat. But the fan AoE that Scipio Prime uses is great for Barbarian Chaining as well. So if you want to use Barbarian Chaining, pretty much anybody who's tanky or can further use YSG skill damage is great, because you can then just damage them down faster or survive longer as you're chaining them. And this can be a huge bonus for free-to-play players who are trying to save AP, because with Kahars, for example, you can save thousands upon thousands of AP by chaining Kahars with YSG as an AoE option. But with that, we'll conclude our discussion on YSG. Overall, I think YSG is a great option, and really I don't see him going anywhere anytime soon, as he is still probably the king of the free-to-plays. But let me know what you think. Do you have YSG already built? Are you planning on building him? Let me know in the comments. And as also, let me know if you want me to cover a different commander or a different concept, because I usually take those recommendations and make videos with them. And it may end up in the future video topic, so let me know as well. And as always, good luck, fight well, and I will see you on the battlefield.